Welcome back, fellow mitochondriacs, for another episode of Cancer as a Mitochondrial Metabolic Disease. So, happy Monday. And, you know, this is a topic that I've wanted to talk about for a while, but I wasn't sure exactly how to integrate this into our discussion. And I think it's going to end up being a two-part kind of micro series because it's such an interesting topic, but it's also there's a lot to talk about when it comes to deuterium depletion therapy. And so, without further ado, let's get into what I've got for us today. So, I wanted to start with by talking about how deuterium depletion therapy is, in essence, a cancer therapy, but it doesn't mean that it only works in one particular way. And I think it, in several different ways, or several different ways of looking at it, it dovetails beautifully into metabolic therapy because the foundation of deuterium depletion therapy is a ketogenic diet. So therefore, you're already doing at least some degree of deuterium depletion therapy just by being on a ketogenic diet, which is why I think it dovetails nicely in. It also provides us with an additional kind of help to aid in metabolic therapy and to improve our mitochondrial function in our normal cells. So this paper is titled Emerging Role of Deuterium Proteum Disbalance in Cell Cycle and Apoptosis. And this was published in February of 2023. And it says here that any shifts in the DH or deuterium hydrogen balance outside or inside the cell promotes an immediate response. The review summarizes reported data on the proliferation and apoptosis of normal and neoplastic or cancer cells in different models of deuterium or deuteration and deuterium depletion in vivo and in vitro. The authors proposed their own concept of the effect of changes in deuterium content in the body on cell proliferation and death. The altered rate of proliferation and apoptosis indicate a pivotal role of the hydrogen isotope content in living organisms and suggest the presence of a DH sensor, which is yet to be detected. So, going a little bit further into the paper, it says here that deuterium is a component of water, but also of numerous organic compounds. It is the second most abundant element in the human body after sodium. Its concentration in blood plasma is 4 times more than potassium, 6 times more than calcium, 10 times more than magnesium, and much more than the content of essential macro and micro elements such as fluorine, iron, iodine, copper, manganese, and cobalt. So, kind of zooming out for a second, what is deuterium? So, there are what are known as isotopes of different molecules. And there are various isotopes of hydrogen. The two here are the non-radioactive versions. And in a hydrogen molecule, which is the simplest atom on the periodic table, it's the first molecule in the periodic table, there is a proton and there is an electron. In a deuterium molecule, which is an isotope of hydrogen, it has a proton and an electron, but it also has a neutron, which doubles its atomic weight, which makes it different than protium or light hydrogen. In nature, there are a variety of different types of water that we can drink, which is normal to our planet. There is what we classically think of water, which is H2O. There is actually a DHO, and there is a D2O. Okay. And what that means is instead of having the two hydrogen or protium light hydrogen ions on this oxygen molecule to make H2O, there's actually a variety of D or H, which means it can be a DHO or a D2O, which is known as heavy water. Heavy water, because deuterium is twice the atomic weight, the D2O actually weighs more than normal water. It says here in this paper that according to the international standard marine ordinary water, the deuterium content in drinking water is 155.76 parts per million. The average range of deuterium concentration in drinking water was determined after evaluation of the isotopic concentration of bottled and packaged samples from water all around the world by scientific groups from different countries. Its value is approximately 130 to 160 parts per million and depends on the geographic region. So what I'm trying to illustrate here is that not all water is the same. In fact, it depends on the region of where you're getting the water from will depend on how much deuterium or D2O or DHO is in that water relative to the other types of water. I put this in here because I thought this was interesting. Lipid-based nutrition, or basically like a high-fat nutrition, have demonstrated about a twofold increase in the production of intracellular water compared to carbohydrate nutrition, mainly due to the cooperative mitochondrial and peroxisomal lipid substrate oxidation to H2O. This fact allows a hypothesis to be put forward that during an active evolutionary development of living organisms, the content of deuterium in natural waters was lower than that of modern times. And in this regard, light water may be considered a stimulus for the activation of certain processes in organisms. So what they're saying is that they believe that, in older days, there may have been more light water around compared to a higher deuterium water compared to what it is today. And I went ahead and pulled this. I pulled this from this paper here. And, one of my mentors, Dr. Jack Cruz, talks about deuterium a lot, deuterium depleted water. And I wanted to try to find some backup to what he was saying here. So it seems like it's quite a bit stronger to say that as we get closer to the equator, the more deuterium there is. And as we get closer to the poles, or the higher the latitude, the lower the deuterium content is. He also talks about altitude, but I couldn't find as good of a correlation between altitude and deuterium content. It seems somewhat flat depending on the altitude. But that being said, the generally the higher kind of Icelandic, Norwegian, Swedish, those kind of waters from the very high latitude countries have less deuterium, and then the water around the equator is more deuterium. And there's some hypothesis that animals know when to migrate north and south depending on the deuterium content of food and water. So let's look a little bit more at some of the waters that we have that there's been testing on. So you see here seawater, which it doesn't give a latitude, but given the amount of deuterium, it probably would be closer to the equator to have 155. Coconut water, because it's more of a tropical fruit, is going to have a higher deuterium content than water that would be up in the Icelandic regions, like the Icelandic or the Voss or Evian, which has a lower parts per million by about 10 parts per million. What about food? Food also has deuterium as well. And in general, the higher carbohydrate foods are going to have more deuterium. So if we look at again, coconut water, which is basically sugar and water, it's going to have a high parts per million. Or if you look at corn, fiber, or wheat, we see about 150 to 156 parts per million. And then when we get down into the fat foods, we see that lard or cocoa butter has about 132 parts per million, peanut butter 131, regular kind of butter is 124 from dairy, cottage cheese 136, olive oil 130. So you can see here that the majority of the avocado 130, the majority of the higher fat foods contain less deuterium. So that's why I say that in general, deuterium depletion therapy dovetails beautifully into metabolic therapy because if you're going to do metabolic therapy as proposed by Seifried and others, you would be on a therapeutic ketogenic diet, which is mostly a high fat diet, right? So you're already going to be getting a large amount of deuterium depleted foods. What you're missing would be the water. We'll talk about the water. So going down further, a number of studies have examined the effects of reduced deuterium on DNA. It has been reported that deuterium atoms getting into the hydrogen bonds between pairs of nitrogenous bases of the DNA molecule can affect the probability of the occurrence of open states, breaks in the hydrogen bonds between bases. Consumption of deuterium depleted water, DDW, significantly reduces the number of DNA single-strand breaks, which generally indicates an increase in efficiency of cell defense systems. It is known that a DNA molecule in natural conditions has one deuterium atom for every 6,400 hydrogen atoms. And the change in this ratio can lead to a change in the mutation frequency of DNA molecule during the evolution of living systems. Taken together, these data suggest that a higher efficacy of proliferation and a pool of investigation and support the idea to investigate the effect of DDW on cell proliferative activity and anti-tumor effects, as well as the changes in endogenous antioxidant systems and non-specific resistance of an organism. The results have shown that studies in this field are promising, as very interesting and encouraging data were obtained on the effects produced by the shifts of protium, light hydrogen, and deuterium content on cell proliferation and apoptosis. Going down further, it says when the hydrogen proton is replaced by deuterium, the transmission and rotation properties will change. The enrichment of cells with deuterium may lead to the inhibition of electron transporting and respiratory chains, and consequently to the accumulation of electrons in mitochondria and migration to the cytosol, resulting in generation of free radicals. As the deuterium dissociates slower than the proton, protons in an active site of macromolecules, DNA, RNA, proteins, etc., can exchange with deuterons. Deuteron has twice the mass of a proton, and it creates stronger and shorter covalent bonds. The resulting deuteron bond cause changes in the conformation and consequently in the function of the macromolecule. For example, deuterating the active center of an enzyme will provoke changes in their functional activity. So what is it? I mean, that's a lot of speak, science speak. What essentially are they saying? They're saying that when deuterium is higher in the intracellular milieu, it will change functionally how our proteins and enzymes work. It will change their performance, their function, their ability to be efficient of doing their job, of changing certain molecules to other molecules. It will also essentially break the electron transport chain and allow for more oxidative stress to happen, which damages the mitochondria and other parts of the cell. This is a pretty cool slide, but it also, I took it from the same paper, but it also, I think, could use some work on helping us understand like what they mean. So for example, I'm seeing here altered deuterium supply, right? So it's kind of vague. And it says shifts in DH gradient, degree of alterations of deuterium content, shifts in the deuterium hydrogen gradient. And the target is in normal cells and tissues. And what they're saying is if you shift to a higher deuterium, there's going to be intensification of proliferation and changes in metabolism. And then if you shift the deuterium concentration in the actual cytoplasm or the water that is inside the cells, let's look at normal cells first. There's so if you lower the deuterium amount within normal cells, there is a reduced DNA damage and reduced production of free radicals, and there's a higher resistance to stress. However, if you lower deuterium content within cancer cells, there is a suppression of their growth and metabolism, and it activates apoptosis, which is something that is suppressed within cancer cells. They actually kind of make it so they're immortal. So they actually turn off apoptosis, or they set things in motion so that apoptosis is inactivated. And when you lower deuterium, the amount of deuterium in the cancer cells, it actually allows the reestablishment of apoptosis, or programmed cell death. So let's go back slightly, talking about the mitochondrial electron transport chain. What are we functionally doing? We are taking food energy, okay, in the form of NADH and FADH2. Now, breaking this down a little bit, when we add a proton, which should be a light hydrogen proton, okay, when we add that to NAD with the electrons, we create a high energy molecule, okay? So we have NADH or FADH2. And we see here that NADH will then reform NAD. It'll lose its hydrogen or its proton, and it'll lose its electrons. And those electrons are going to flow through to create metabolic water, okay? And that should be a deuterium depleted water. Now, the hydrogen ion gets pumped through these channels to form a proton gradient. And this should be truly a proton gradient, not a deuterium gradient, because when the hydrogen ions come back down the gradient, it goes through this ATPase, okay, the ATP synthase nano machine. And these machines are very important for the creation of ATP, but I particularly want to show that the hydrogen ions fit into this rotor in a way that is very specific to hydrogen. I believe they have 9 or 11 different places where a hydrogen ion should be able to fit while this thing is spinning. And just to give a little scale, this nano motor is actually spinning at 9,000 revolutions per minute, okay? And which means that there is 1,500 protons are released into the mitochondrial matrix each second, which is unfathomable. So basically what they're saying is that this thing's spinning 9,000 revolutions per minute, and each second there is 1,500 of these proton atoms that are coming down into the mitochondrial matrix, because this is the inner mitochondrial membrane space, and this is the matrix, this side of it. So what happens when we have deuterium? Well, you can see here that the green is a hydrogen ion, and this yellow is ATP that's being made, and this thing's spinning. And remember, this is spinning at 9,000 revolutions per minute, and then 1,500 of these protons are coming down into the matrix every second. Well, when deuterium, which is an isotope of hydrogen, but it's twice the atomic mass of a hydrogen ion, it will damage and shatter this ATPase. And it says here that deuterium has an extra neutron, making it twice the size of a common hydrogen. When deuterium levels get too high, the cell's ability to filter out these heavy hydrogens is compromised, and it damages mitochondria, restricting and degenerating biological systems. An accumulation of deuterium ultimately breaks down the mitochondria's ATP nanomotors, which make ATP energy in our body. And then, as it said in this paper here, it will actually increase reactive oxygen species and damage mitochondria over time. So we can see here that this is not a good thing. Now, this is aside from the fact that the DH ratios, as it was discussed in the very first slide here, the DH ratio is also very important for the initiation of cell division, which in a cancer cell is happening all the time because they're proliferating continuously. So that ratio has been shown to be effective and really important. And remember, when they change the deuterium concentration in cancer cells, they lower it, it will suppress that proliferation and growth and actually activate programmed cell death, which is evading these cancer cells. So let's take a look at the first way that deuterium depletion therapy could potentially enhance metabolic therapy. So if we think about metabolic therapy, we think about that we need to lower the amount of available glucose to the cell, right? And then we're going to try to specifically lower the amount of available glutamine to the cancer cell. And then we're going to hit it with an oxidative stressor while it's in its weakened, kind of maimed state. Okay. So one way that deuterium depletion therapy could be helpful for metabolic therapy is to help us lower our blood glucose. This was to be honest with you, this is a finding that I was not personally expecting when I was looking through this literature. So this paper was titled Effect of Systemic Subnormal Deuterium Level on Metabolic Syndrome Related and Other Blood Parameters in Humans, a Preliminary Study. And it was published in 2020 in March. And it says here that so I'm just going to start from the top here. The effects of deuterium depletion on the human organisms have been, except for the anti-tumor action, seldom investigated, but by now, and the available data are scarce. In oncological patients who suffered from diabetes and are treated with deuterium depleted water, DDW, an improvement in glucose metabolism was observed. And rat studies also proved the efficacy of DDW to reduce blood sugar. In the present work, 30 volunteers with or basically straight up frank diabetes were enrolled into a clinical trial or a clinical study. The patients received 1.5 liters of water with reduced deuterium content, and it was basically they either got 104 parts per million, which would be considered deuterium depleted, or the other group got 145, which is basically like what you would see in Voss or Evian or these other fairly high latitude waters. It wouldn't be exactly as what you would get if you were drinking like closer to the equator's water, like 155, which is equivalent to 12 millimoles per liter in human. And it says daily. So they got these two different waters daily for 90 days. And the effects of fasting glucose and insulin levels on peripheral glucose disposal and other metabolic parameters were investigated. Fasting insulin and glucose decreased, and insulin reaction on glucose load improved. So basically, insulin resistance was improved. Insulin's action to lower glucose levels because it has a better effect on the receptor was observed in 15 subjects, while in the other 15 changes were opposite. So basically, 30 people had either prediabetes or diabetes. Half of them got low deuterium water, which showed decreased glucose, improved insulin sensitivity, et cetera. And the other half got normal water, and they had actually the opposite effect. So anyway, I wanted to go down further here and look at maybe what the potential mechanism to what this could potentially be. So this paper was titled Deuterium Depleted Water Stimulates GLUT4 Translocation in the Presence of Insulin, which leads to decreased blood glucose concentration. And it was published in December of 2021. And basically, this was a rat model, and they were basically testing rats that were given this STZ induced, which was inducing diabetes in these rats. And they were checking a bunch of different, A1C and fasting insulin and glucose, et cetera. And it looks like it was an 8-week treatment. And they got somewhere between 25 and 150 parts per million of water over this 8 weeks. And it says that these data suggest that deuterium depletion dose-dependently enhanced the effect of insulin on GLUT4 translocation and potentiates glucose uptake in diabetic rats, which explains the lower glucose, fructosamine, and A1C concentrations. Based on our experimental data, deuterium-depleted water could be used to treat patients with metabolic syndrome, MS, by increasing insulin sensitivity. These experiments indicate a naturally occurring deuterium has an impact on metabolic regulations. And so let's see if we can take a look here at this particular paper here. So it's looking like they're measuring serum glucose in millimoles per liter, and it looks like they're giving 1 unit of insulin for every 300 grams of body weight of this particular mouse to see what happens when insulin is stimulating the translocation of this GLUT4 transporter, which is a transporter that is allowing glucose to get outside the cell, inside the cell, so it lowers the blood glucose. So that's why they're looking at serum or blood glucose. And so they gave their insulin at the 0 mark and at 2 hours. These are measured in hours here. So we see here that if they gave tap water, which we have to assume is somewhere between 145 and 155 parts per million, you see that there is a low amount of difference in insulin and lowering the blood glucose for those particular diabetic rats. They are insulin resistant. So therefore, the amount of insulin they're getting is not changing their blood glucose concentration very much. But then if they were to get, it looks like 25 parts per million, you see a significant drop. And then 75 parts per million actually did slightly better. And then interestingly enough, and I had to double check the data to make sure this isn't like labeled incorrectly, because it looks like the 125 actually lowered it the most, as you can see here, which is I think is interesting, because when we go down to the next study, just kind of a little bit cutting to the chase a little bit, we see that really the GLUT4 translocation on a muscle cell with deuterium depleted water, this is a slightly newer study, this is August of 2024, showed that 50 parts per million was actually kind of the highest amount of relative expression of the GLUT4 transporter. So it says here that, well, first of all, I'm going to give you the title: Study of the Effect of Deuterium Depleted Water on the Expression of GLUT4 and Insulin Resistance in Muscle Cell Lines C2, C12. And it says here that GLUT4 gene expression significantly increased under deuterium depletion, reaching a maximum value at deuterium concentration of approximately 50 parts per million, which was approximately 9 times that of natural water, with a deuterium concentration of 150 parts per million. So they're using 150 parts per million, which is kind of right in the middle of what natural waters can potentially be. GLUT4 protein also showed increased in similar DDW concentrations. The membrane translocation of GLUT4 by insulin stimulation had reached a maximum value of a deuterium concentration of approximately between 50 and 75 parts per million, which was approximately 2.2 times that of natural water. Accordingly, glucose uptake also increased up to 2.2 times that of deuterium concentration of approximately 50 parts per million. Drug-induced insulin resistance was attenuated, and the glucose uptake was 4 times higher in the presence of 10 nanograms per milliliter TNF alpha, and 3 times higher in the presence of 1 microgram per milliliter resistin at the deuterium concentration approximately 50 parts per million relative to normal water. These results suggest that DDW or deuterium depleted water promotes GLUT4 expression and insulin stimulated activation in muscle cells and reduces insulin resistance, making it an effective treatment for diabetes. Really, just people who are insulin resistant, people who can't get their glucose down to where they need to go, right? So this helps them significantly. So again, we see a relative expression. This is how much actual protein, or I should say DNA, is being, activated and expressed depending on the parts per million. So you see here that this is, again, relative level of expression of GLUT4 is about, let's say, 1. So basal levels basically for normal tap water. As we decrease the deuterium, we go to 2, then about 3, then about 7, and then we go up here. When we get to 50 parts per million, we see a 9-fold increase or 900% increase in this GLUT4 translocation. And what they're saying is it ends up meaning that you're able to get rid of 2.5 times more, 220% more glucose than you would if you were drinking tap water, which is pretty unbelievable. I would really love to see more work be done with this so we can see what that means to a human and our A1C, which is at the end of the day going to tell us what it does to our average blood glucose. But you can see how this is another tool in our tool bag that we can be using as a way to increase our ability to get rid of blood glucose and our ability to keep our glucose lower, our insulin lower, and our glucose ketone index lower, right? So, and what does it ultimately mean? You know, like, again, in most of the studies that I've seen, and we'll get to the cancer part of it probably in the next part of this little micro series, but the bottom line is that it means that you're essentially drinking 1.5 to 2 liters of deuterium depleted water in addition to your ketogenic diet. That is ultimately deuterium depleted therapy in a nutshell. Now, the question is, what concentration do you use? And that's where I would, frankly, it really needs to be a discussion between you and your doctor who has a clue about deuterium depleted water and deuterium depletion therapy. Now, to make things easier for everybody else, Gabor Sommelier, who is kind of the guy for deuterium depletion therapy, has a couple of books. He has one called Defeating Cancer, which is a green book he published in like the late 90s. The guy's been studying this for like 30 years or more. And then the newer book is called Deuterium Depletion. And that book is like a wonderful resource to help you understand how to implement deuterium depletion therapy within your own life. Now, to make things a little bit more simple, what I would say is, because I've watched several podcasts of Gabor Sommelier, Dr. Sommelier, and what I would say is that you would probably do something where you start between 100 or 75 parts per million, and I find it easier to recommend people do 75. And the reason I say that is because if we're able to take, let's say, some of my favorite waters, like I like Voss or Evian or Icelandic to some degree. I find Voss tastes quite a bit better than Icelandic. But anyway, so we're looking at somewhere between 145 parts per million, right, of something that I would drink as your kind of base water, right? It's like, okay, then we go down to so this is one type of water you can get. It's called Preventa. I find that it's a very good water. It comes in 1.5 liter bottles, which is very convenient. But the problem is it's like I can never find it. It's never available. It's like always out of stock. So what I end up doing is I end up recommending getting like either light water. Actually, I almost always recommend light water because light water, it's on Amazon. And you can get it shipped to your door pretty easily. Now, it is expensive, but what you do is you say, okay, let me buy this 10 parts per million light water, and I'm going to do a 50-50 ratio. So that, in theory, should be, 100. That would be 155 divided by 2, right? So you're looking at somewhere like 77 parts per million for the 50-50 ratio of water of a 10 and like a normal, like lower deuterium water like Evian or Voss. So that's kind of the way you would get your 77 parts per million. And as you can see here, at least from the glucose side of things, it seems that 75 parts per million has just about as good as an effect as 50 parts per million. It's kind of interesting that when they went lower than 50 parts per million, there was actually slightly a drop. Went from a 9-fold increase to a slightly less than 8-fold increase compared to the baseline, 150 parts per million water. But anyway, so, what you could do is you could start at that 1-to-1 ratio and get your 77, let's say, parts per million be here. And then what I believe is my understanding, what Dr. Gabor Sommelier says is you kind of like, if you need to, you can step down gradually. And you can start higher too, but it probably depends on your situation, whether or not you're like a low stage, no metastases, or if you're like metastatic, like stage 4 or something like that, you may be more aggressive when you start. But I think that the easiest thing to do is just get, like, again, a lower deuterium water, like an Evian or something like that, and then do a 1-to-1 ratio with 10 parts per million, and you're somewhere in the 77.5 parts per million ish, and you drink 1.5 liters of that a day, and that dovetails with your ketogenic diet. So it very likely will help you lower your blood glucose and lower your insulin requirement, and kind of enhance your glucose ketone index, which is kind of the reason why I wanted to have this particular video, was to share on its ability to enhance metabolic therapy just from the glucose side of things. I then want to go into metabolic therapy or its real effect on cancer cells, okay, and how it does its magic, because it has profound effects on various types of cancer. And in particular, there was a really cool study where they were doing it, deuterium depletion therapy with standard of care for glioblastoma multiforme, which is one of the most deadly cancers there are. So it seems to have a really cool, really profound effect on these kind of things. And like I said, I love therapies that are easy, and I love therapies that dovetail into metabolic therapy. And so therefore, that's why I wanted to present this to us. Now, I do think that there should be a second kind of half of this looking at its effects on cancer specifically, and I'm happy to do that. So just want to read some of these comments here. So I'm currently fasting with deuterium depleted water. That's awesome. Just make sure that, Mark, you are not drinking way more water on your fast than you would normally drink, because you don't want to, you don't want to cause a hyponatremia type situation or a low sodium situation by drinking too much water compared to not drinking any food at all or eating any food at all. And I'd ask you maybe how long your fast is. If it's short, like 2 or 3 days, you're probably fine. But if it's like a longer term fast, be very careful. Have your doctor, your local doctor, maybe check a basic or a comprehensive metabolic panel to make sure you're not, messing up your electrolytes with drinking only water. So glad you're looking into this. Thanks for covering this. Was just looking into DDW for my mom's breast cancer. Looks promising and tad expensive. It is expensive, sadly. And hopefully once more awareness gets out and more people know about it and more companies start to make deuterium depleted water, hopefully the supply and demand curve will start to fix itself and it won't be so expensive, but it is expensive. I would say it's probably quite a bit less expensive than things like hyperbaric oxygen therapy or even IV vitamin C, when you're talking about like hundreds of dollars per treatment, depending on the place you get it done at. So relatively, it is not expensive, but it is expensive when you think about a bottle of water being, $10, $12. I can understand that. Thank you, Mark Allen, for the super chat. Do you know if breathing molecular hydrogen has deuterium in it? Yes, it should, because hydrogen is fractionated all over the world, right? We see that it's in water and it's in organic molecules. So one of the reasons why my mentor, Dr. Jack Cruz, is not like these deuterium machines is because there's no quality control for deuterium in it. So if you could quality control it and make sure it's deuterium, low deuterium, at least probably less than 125 parts per million, it'd probably be good to go. Or some of these machines I've seen where you use water to make the molecular hydrogen or whatnot. If you're using DDW in a machine like that, maybe that would be the way to do it. It says light water is the nest. I'm guessing you meant best. I drink 2 liters a day of light water. Wow. Just like 10 or 5 parts per million. Yeah, I think light water is the easiest to get a hold of, and it's not. I think it's probably one of the better ones. I think that. How much better is an IV drip of deuterium depleted water better than its oral consumption? That's a great question. As far as I know, there are no deuterium depleted IV therapies. My friend and colleague Jordan and I have talked about this for a long time. What if we were able to make a deuterium depleted IV therapy? I think it'd be amazing, but I don't know. I don't think it exists as of right now. Maybe someday. In cancer mitosis, the more deuterium depleted water in the cells and mitochondria when sister cells are duplicating the DNA will be more likely to use protein hydrogen, allowing for the allows for the mutation to be sliced, destroyed, or repaired at the same phase of mitosis. It seems, there was a great slide that I was watching a podcast with Dr. First of all, I really recommend looking up Dr. Gabor Samoye and actually like looking for podcasts he does. He's Hungarian, so he's got a little bit of an accent. It's a little bit hard to understand, but like he does excellent. He does excellent podcasts. As a matter of fact, kind of getting in preparation for this, I was watching one where he did a podcast with busy superhuman Dr. Sarah Hughes, and it's called Deuterium Depletion: Cancer Survival and Diabetes: 30 Years of Scientific Research. That was great, and he also has PowerPoints like I have, and he was showing some really cool slides that I couldn't find. I don't know if they're in a paper that I just couldn't find. I couldn't find the images that were, but he was talking about, basically what he was doing was he was using a hyper deuterated, I guess, water, you'd call it, deuterium enriched water at like 300 parts per million. And then he had another one that was like deuterium depletion at like either like 100 or like maybe it was even less than that parts per million. And they were talking about all of the different like hundreds of genes that were changed, like pro-cancer genes that were changed when it was hyperdeuterium versus the ones that were turned off by low deuterium, which I thought was pretty cool. DDW and high, what's it say? DDW with IV vitamin C doses good. Yeah, but I think that I personally believe, okay, that this is a problem that requires a combination approach. And so therefore IV vitamin C and DDW could be beautifully synergistic, I believe. I'd love to see studies done on it, when maybe we get some more research that doesn't have to do with pharma. But I would love to see the research. My gut tells me it will be synergistic for sure. This is because deuterium is twice the mass of protium, has way stronger bond. Exactly. Dr. Cruz's latest Patreon post is on deuterium. I believe it. Dr. Cruz has talked about deuterium for years. I mean, I didn't even know about deuterium, frankly, not in any way clinically until I started listening to Dr. Cruz about 2018. Remember, it's 10 parts per million, so you dilute it to make it affordable. Dilute. Yeah, I see that. You're welcome. Let's see here. So a lot of chatter going back and forth. Really cool. Hi, Mitochondriacs Army. Yeah, that's really sad to hear that about Modern Life Water, because it's actually made just in my neck of the woods. It's made in Plantation, Florida, which is just minutes from where I live. And I've heard that there are some problems with Modern Life Water. It's labeled to be at like 5 parts per million, but I didn't realize it was 150 parts per million. I heard it was somewhere in the 50 parts per million, and not truly 5, which is why I want it to be good, because it's in glass. I like that, and it's cheaper, and it's local business, which I'd love to support. But again, I've heard some bad things, unfortunately. Yeah, so it says here that vitamin C ampules or shots. How many in order to come close to IV vitamin C? There is no amount of vitamin C. If you're talking about oral vitamin C, there's no amount of oral vitamin C you can take to get to the high dose IV vitamin C effectiveness. There is no amount. It just doesn't get into the body fast enough or good enough. I was skeptical of DDW capabilities until today. Alan, get on board with the DDW, man. DDW is for real. Just wait till we talk about like life extension for people who have, or survival extension for people who have glioblastoma. It's unbelievable. Deuterium depletion therapy. And that's for one of the most malignant, cancers there are. I heard Gabor talking about prostate cancer. I mean, the book is really packed. If you really want to like a deep dive, you can listen to his podcast. He is really good at presenting, but also the books are also really good too. And it's like very organized and very stepwise, depending on what kind of cancer you have. Intravenous shots of okay, sorry, I didn't know. I wasn't sure. Intravenous shots of vitamin C, not oral. So it's a mg per kg dosing, and that would be a conversation between you and your doctor. But it is a well-known mg per or excuse me, not mg. It's a gram per kilogram dosing that is well known. Okay, you can find it easily on the internet or talking to your doctor. No amount of liposomal vitamin C will get you to the goal. Unfortunately, I wish that it did. Trust me. And a lot of marketing will tell you that it does. It does not even close. It's probably like at least like a 10-fold difference. Okay, like 10x difference of IV versus liposomal or PO. All right. Well, we've got about 45 minutes, and I wanted to cover deuterium depleted water or deuterium depletion therapies effects on glucose, because that's kind of the series we're in right now. I'm going to go ahead and finish deuterium depletion therapy on cancer as a whole. It doesn't fit nicely in the box. I mean, I could wait till we cover like oxidative therapies and talk about it, but it just makes sense to just talk about it all at once. So I'll talk about it later this week. Kind of the rest of the story when it comes to deuterium depletion therapy and what it is effectively does for cancer and how it affects cancer survivability. So this is interesting. Gabor, for his PhD thesis in the late 80s, discovered that the DH ratio turns oncogenes on and off, and he's got over 3,000 case studies now, and it's probably the reason why DDW is censored off Wikipedia. Isn't that sad? Isn't that disgusting in some ways? Censorship, not the way to go. All right, well, God bless. I hope you have a great rest of your Monday. I hope this was helpful, and we will get to the nitty-gritty in particular, about cancer in the coming video. Until next time.